If you enjoy my conversations with the gang on Garden Variety, check out my other podcast, Talk of Iowa. Each day, new guests drop by to chat about books, history, art, culture, and life in Iowa. Subscribe and listen to Talk of Iowa every weekday. This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. We have just gotten through a late blast of summer, but the fact that cooler weather is coming is undeniable. It's time to make plans to protect your vulnerable plants. This hour, we'll talk about tender perennials and also how to know when it's time to bring your houseplants inside from their outdoor summer spots. Cindy Haynes is here, professor of horticulture at Iowa State University. Hello, Cindy.
Good morning.
And Aaron Stile is here, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist. Hello, Aaron.
Good morning.
And I think we should start with a definition first. What is a tender perennial?
So a tender perennial is a plant that would normally make it through the winter in someplace warmer, but because we live where we live, it gets too cold in the winter and it doesn't. But what they almost all have is some sort of usually underground structure that allows for us to pretty readily save them from year to year in a dormant state. So many of us would call them a bulb, but actually most of them are more like tubers or rhizomes or corms. They're all storage organs like a bulb, but botanically speaking have more specific terms.
All right, so give me an example of some of our favorites, the ones that show up pretty frequently in Iowa gardens.
The first one that comes to mind is canna. Many of us are familiar with canna. They're probably one of the easiest ones to save from year to year. And they have these big, fleshy kind of rhizomes underground and big tropical leaves. And they love our hot summers, but they would never survive our winters unless we dug them up and brought them in.
All right, well, let's talk about kind of basics. So if you have tender perennials, you probably know that you have tender perennials. So what is kind of the basic plan for overwintering these plants?
Well, basically, you wait until frost almost kills the top of some of these plants or kills the foliage. It's usually not a hard frost, so the soil is still warm enough that you can kind of dig them up. So you can do this either right before frost or right after a frost that kind of kills the foliage. And then you're going to dig them up. You're going to let them dry just a little bit, especially if it's moist or wet soil. And then you're going to store them someplace cool. And with most of these tender perennials, it's somewhere between 40 and 60 degrees. 50 is your target, I think, for many of these. 50 degrees over the winter is sometimes a little hard to find.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be a little warmer than, say, 45. So an attached garage is sometimes a good place, but certainly cooler than 55. So, a cold spot in your basement might be a good place as well. And when we store them, we usually store them in boxes or bags, sometimes with some material like vermiculite or peat moss or even shredded paper to kind of keep them a little bit moist but not wet so that they're going to rot.
Well, I was just going to ask about that moisture level because, when we think about cool spaces, we sometimes think about cool, damp spaces, and you don't want that, right?
No, you don't want it to be too damp because then some of these will actually rot and kind of die. And it makes an awful smell sometimes as well. So especially if it's in a busy part of your basement. So we check on them occasionally during the winter. So we just kind of go in and kind of peek and see how they're doing. And those that have shriveled up and stayed a little too dry, we remove. Those that are starting to rot or have a soft spot, we might remove those. So it's usually not 100% survival for most homes, but it's usually you still get 3/4 better than half. So it sounds tricky, but it's usually pretty successful, especially for cannas and dahlias.
Yeah,
because those are pretty tough.
So how do you know that it's time? And you kind of have to really stay on top of what's happening with the weather and your plants. What are the signs that you're looking for so you know it's time to go out and dig these up?
Yeah, so these are typically very frost tender plants. And so the very first light frost, you're going to see leaf dieback, brown and black edges on the leaves, maybe even a collapse of the plant, depending on how cold it got that first time. And that's your cue for most of the plants. There are a handful, things like some of the elephant ear and banana that you would want to get into the house before frost, but dahlias and cannas and caladiums and gladiolas, all of these can wait until that very first frost, and then that's your cue to go out and dig and kind of go through that whole process.
All right. Well, and when the first frost occurs, then the clock is ticking. Do you have to get them out of the ground right away?
You know, typically when we see a first frost, it warms up again a little bit after that. It's not like a race against time per se. You usually have a week or two to get the work done. The sooner you can get it done, the more likely you're going to have success next spring. But, you know, depending on the year, it may be fairly late before you get them out of the ground, and that may still work. For most of Iowa, the first frost is on average the first or second week in October. So we're getting close. But there's been years where I haven't got my cannons dug until the end of October, very first part of November, and they were okay because of the weather. Yeah. So
I would
it
say
just depends.
This usually needs to be done by the end of October. So you're usually safe within that window. November is getting a little late, and the ground could be freezing. So
that was a very late frost year that happened.
Yes.
So that's the only reason that worked.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and admit that I don't grow any of these, and you both know that I have a hard time getting my bulbs in, before Thanksgiving. Right. So this doesn't sound like something for me, but I really admire people who pull this off year after year. Are there any special instructions with some of these plants that you want to mention? I mean, we've talked about the basics, but they're all a little bit different.
Yeah, I think, there's a few of them, in particular, the ones that have relatively small underground structures like caladiums and gladiolas. They're really prone to drying out over the winter. And so there's kind of this Goldilocks range we want to keep these plants in, where it's just right in terms of moisture. And those can be a little bit more difficult to keep in that range because they're so small. And so they really do need to be stored with some kind of loose material. Unmilled sphagnum moss works really well. Vermiculite or perlite could work. A shredded newspaper could work. And then you check on them like every 4 to 6 weeks, and you may be wetting that material to keep them from drying out too much.
Tell me where you keep yours, Aaron. What's your special cool enough, dry enough spot?
I live in an older house, and I have a cool corner of the basement that they work well in. And so I don't have a root cellar. That would be ideal, but most of us don't have root cellars anymore. So a cool corner of my basement works really well. It's like a little storage room. It doesn't have an active heat vent in it over the winter, and so it stays in that kind of 50, 55-ish range, which is a little on the warmer side, but not too bad. It works.
Yeah, Cindy, how about you?
So my basement, I think, is a little too warm and a little too hectic. But I do have a sunroom, a 3-season room that does get colder, usually stays above freezing. I also have an attached garage that usually stays above freezing. And I can get it in that 40, 45 degree range. I have a hard time getting it to 50, but, especially when it's super cold. But I can keep it above 40, 45. So, yeah.
That works.
That works.
Right. Yeah. So now to shift gears, a lot of us have taken our houseplants out for their summer vacation. They are thriving and beautiful. And with frost coming, we have to know when it's time to bring them in. What are the signs we should look for?
You don't wait for frost on this one.
Yeah, you don't wait for frost on this one. That's true. I always look to the weather forecast, and when I start seeing lows in the 50s at night, that's my cue to start my process of the Great Migration back in. So this is when I would go out and start watering or spraying down the plants to clean them up, but also to hopefully dislodge some of the potential pests that I might accidentally bring in. This is also when I test to make sure that an ant colony hasn't formed in one of the containers.
Or
which
wasp
doesn't,
nest. Or
yeah, which
something
doesn't
like
happen very often,
Yeah.
but I have had it happen. And it's more of an annoyance than anything, but I don't want that annoyance over the winter.
No.
So that would be, and honestly, for most of us, that's about now. We've certainly had some cooler nights lately, and we're getting to shorter days anyway. And so we could probably most of us could start bringing in our plants anytime now.
So if you do find insects in your house plants that you've had outside, what do you do about that?
Yeah, you got to catch it early. That's the
Right.
big thing. It's interesting because these insects are on the plants outside, but they're kind of in a natural balance because there's a lot of factors out there that help keep them in a natural balance. And then we bring them in, and it's like transporting them to Cancun,
Right.
Like it's like the best possible place for them. It's warm, it's well taken care of.
No natural predators.
No natural predators. It's just great. And so the population, if you have an issue for it, tends to explode in about 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
And so that kind of first month and a half they're in the house, you want to monitor frequently. And as soon as you start to see the inkling of a problem, you want to kind of get ahead of it as much as you can. And that has good success usually.
And if you notice a problem outside, so that you have a lot of white flies or a lot of aphids on one particular thing, before you bring it in, you can just wash the plant. There are insecticidal soaps, or you can just hose it down really well. So you can do some things to maybe limit what the amount of insects you're bringing in if you notice a large population, particularly on 1 or 2 plants. I have a gardenia, which I know I'm going to have to hose down before I bring it in,
Yes.
because gardenia coming in with whitefly is like it's like a symbiotic relationship. so I'm going to wash this one before I bring it inside, or otherwise I'm going to have whiteflies for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we only have about 30 seconds left. If it's been a good summer, your plants are a lot bigger, things are going to change when they come inside. What are some pointers?
You're probably going to see some leaf drop. Your watering habits are definitely going to change. You're going to stop fertilizing for a little while. Know that the plants are going to pout a little bit because you just brought them back from vacation. So keep them as happy as you can, brightest window as you can, and watch out for those pests, and you should have good success.
Erin Style, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist, Cindy Haynes, professor of horticulture at Iowa State University. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Style, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.